Hi, and welcome to another episode of Louisiana Children's Museum in Dialogue series. Today's session is all about reading. As you can see,
Our
we
favorite.
are surrounded by books. We want to talk to you about choosing books with your children, what you might see in their schools, where to get some resources for free books, how to read books, what kind of books you should be reading, and what kids can learn from books. So let's talk about books.
Great.
How are you?
Great. I am great. This is one of my favorite topics. So I love children's books, and I have a little problem with acquisition of them. And so I always feel like I have to have more and more and more as soon as the new ones come out. It's very exciting. So.
And Holly, what makes us even qualified to talk about children's books?
Well, I have a background in early childhood education. I've been an early childhood director as well as a teacher in pre-K and levels below and above that. And I've been a teacher, I hate to say, over 30 years, which definitely ages me, but it has put me in a position to have seen a lot of really good children's books. And even more than that, I feel like I was read to as a child, and it was a wonderful experience for me. Mm-hmm. And as the child of an English teacher, it just has always been a part of my life.
And you're the In Dialogue director at the museum.
I am. So I'm responsible for a good deal of our literacy programming and just making sure that the things that we do around the museum always include a literacy element. And the fact that we're bringing in guest speakers, guest authors, and some of those other activities that really will bring our literacy programming to the forefront. In particular, we're excited about a partnership that we have with the Krewe of Dolly, where they're going to come and launch the Imagination Library coming to Orleans Parish. And so we're excited that literacy is becoming a really important element of the planning for children's activities within our city.
Within our city, but the Louisiana Children's Museum, literacy has always been there. Every single one of our galleries has a library and a book nook so that you can cuddle up and read with your children.
Yes. And you have a background in literacy as well.
I do have a background in literacy. My background is in the reading and writing connection. So we might do another In Dialogue in the reading and writing connection. But today we're really going to talk about emergent literacy, building the foundations of literacy, and then what happens when they get older and they don't want to read anymore, and what are some fun things to do for kids who are like, I don't want to read, I'd rather do movies. Yeah. There's a lot of adults who don't want to read either. But yeah. We've learned through studies, being in education for so long, that it's important to build a foundation and an appreciation for reading very early. That print motivation comes before they can even, 3 years old, they might be running around, but they'll stop, even in this room that we're in right now, and which we'll tell you about in a second, they'll stop and come and listen to your story and then run off and play with something and come back and listen, so they know that there's meaning in that book that you're showing them, but they might not just be sitting still and paying attention to every single word. So we're going to talk about that too, ways that you can read to all ages, and you don't have
enticing.
To read every single word if they're not paying attention. Yes. But what room are we in right now?
So this is our Talk and Play Center, which is our main, I guess you would call our library within the museum, and it is a space that was deliberately created for families that are visiting the museum and also families that just want to have a chance to have some literacy experiences with their children to come and be a part of it. And so we have purposefully set it in an area that is before the entrance to the museum. And so this area is open, and I'm very excited that we are actually working to increase the access time to these areas. We do have story time every day at 11 o'clock and at 1 o'clock. And then on Sunday, when our hours are a little bit different, we just have that 1 o'clock story time. But I'm really excited that this is a space that will be open to the public. And it will give parents not only an opportunity to come in and explore some of the variety of books that we have, but also some of the activities that you can do surrounding books, and just really have a cozy spot that you can read with children. If you feel like you don't have that cozy spot at home, or if you want to have some examples of how to read with your children, Ms. Cherlyn, who is our storyteller, is amazing, and you cannot find a better model than her as you try to build your voice as a storyteller. And so I want to encourage people to come and visit, even if all you do is come and visit and talk and play for a short time. And then, of course, we hope that you'll investigate the rest of the museum. But We want this to be a place that's open to the public.
Lots of books, lots of reading happening at the museum.
Yes.
But let's talk a little bit about building that foundation, that oral language development, even before books are. I mean, you could be reading a book, but a baby's not really understanding what's happening. So how do we
Correct.
build that oral language development early on?
Well, definitely by reading to children from the very beginning. And I think even for parents before they have their children, even while moms are pregnant, that's a great time. It's also a great way to involve other members of the family. You can read to mom's belly or but always you need to be reading to children, because the more they can hear that language, the more they can follow that cadence of the way that things are read, or even following conversation. All of that is going to build up their ability to understand and later utilize language. There are two types of language that children have. One is receptive, which is the input that they're taking in, their ability to understand new information that's coming, and then expressive language, which is their way of being able to convey that information back out. And so absolutely, in young children, their receptive language is growing so much faster than that expressive language. And I think parents definitely see that with children who find it difficult to find that word that they're trying to say, but there's a lot going on inside. And the time between 0 and 3, that is the time where the brain is doing the most growth, and that's where they're building those synapses within the brain. And so there's all kinds of things that you can do for that. You want to expose them to a lot of different types of books, include lots of, variety of language so that they're hearing a lot of things. We talk about when we're doing social emotional discussions, you want to move beyond mad, sad, happy, mad, sad, glad. And same thing with other things. You want to get beyond just run, walk, sit. This is a time for them to be able to hear some of those bigger words, and they may not be able to reproduce that, but they're taking in that language, and it helps them to be able to understand that. And then later, when the brain is sleeping, it's able to integrate that information. And it's similar to the way an adult might learn a new language. And so you are able probably to understand a lot more if someone is speaking a new language to you than you would be able to reproduce to come back. And so you're giving them that foundation so that later when they are ready for that practice, that expressive practice, they have that background to be able to refer to.
And we were talking about the importance of the way that books just build vocabulary and what you just said. So I've taught pre-K, first grade, second grade, fourth grade, seventh grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. But I remember when I taught first grade, there was a lot of, in second grade, we're getting into writing, and we would say a lot, put said to bed, put those boring words to bed. And we were just talking about how when you're reading a children's book, well, first of all, there's a way to hold the book, right? If you're reading to a lot of them. But sometimes as parents, you might just be in bed, like lying down reading the book.
Right.
But this passage right here, which is from one of our favorites, Jack Prelutsky does a lot of children's poetry. But Tyrannosaurus was a beast that had no friends, to say the least. It ruled the ancient out of doors and slaughtered other dinosaurs. I mean, there's ancient, there's slaughtered.
Slaughtered, that's a great word.
These are some action words that you're not going to hear if you're not reading these children's books, because in speech we don't go around saying ancient and slaughtered as much as conversationally there's a lot deeper vocabulary in children's books.
Absolutely.
And people don't realize that.
And even basic things like colors. You could talk about something being pink, or you could talk about it being salmon, or something could be green, or it could be chartreuse, or avocado, or moss. And so those are great things to kind of drop into conversations and talk. Not only are you improving vocabulary, but you're also helping children to develop those skills about similarities and differences, which ultimately is going to become something that they'll need in other areas. And also, books are a great way to introduce mathematical language as well. More than, less than, further than, closer to, some of those kinds of things as well.
And there's a lot of research right now on how important background knowledge is to comprehension.
Absolutely.
And so if you're always reading rhyming books, that's great. You're building that phonological awareness, but you should also be building some information, that maybe maybe it's caves, or maybe it's giraffes, you know,
Right.
maybe it's cooking, like just building some knowledge too, so that they have some reference to when those things come later as well. They have some background knowledge.
Absolutely.
And it's not just in books, it's experiences as well.
Right.
But but in lots of books, you can learn a lot about dinosaurs, you can learn a lot about space, you know, and
Right.
we have all of these books here. We have a lot of genres here. One of the things I would do as a classroom teacher is every time we read a book, we would have a construction paper link, and we would put the author, and we would be so proud of ourselves that we read all of these
so many
books.
books, yeah.
But I would make sure that we would put it the same color for our nonfiction books. So if we had, you know, purple, green, and yellow, and we didn't have a blue in a long time, it was like, we haven't read a nonfiction
It's
book in a
time-
while.
yes,
Let's read
and
something that we
poetry.
can learn about, and
Yes.
other genres too, like that. Yeah.
Yes.
So, and the kids would tell us, I want to read a poetry book. I want to read a.
Yeah.
And then you get kids like you. If they're not exposed, they don't know what genres they like the most.
Right.
So you
right.
just want to
And
give them that
I
exposure.
think we were discussing before, especially young children who get really hyper focused on dinosaurs, for example, that's a really big one. This is a great way to bring in an alternative means of learning information about that. And again, we're trying to always build that spark of reading enjoyment. And so if your child is doing a lot of nonfiction or informational reading, then, you know, we can help you, your librarian can help you find books that are on similar topics, but also take a different bent to it, because you want to inject some humor. You want to do, and Jack Prelutsky is a great one. There are, you know, when I taught pre-K, several of my kids would memorize some of those poems because they were so hilarious that they thought it was funny. And of course, anything that involves underpants is always going to be hilarious. So I'll just give you that little key there.
And we do a lot of read alouds here. And like I said, if you're a parent or a caregiver or a babysitter or a grandparent, there's a lot of cozy cuddling. Let's get a nook and read together.
Right.
If you have multiple children, multiple grandchildren, there's that read aloud aspect, and we want to make sure that you're not droning. There's some tips to doing a good read aloud.
Yes.
Do the voices. You know, always get excited and do the voices. There's a lot of examining a book before you even get started. So you're building print awareness when you're showing them, this is the title, what's the title say, and who's the author. It's great to let them know that a person created this. It didn't just magically appear. Someone drew these pictures, someone wrote these words.
What do you think that tells us about what the book might be about?
Making
as well?
predictions.
Yes.
It's very good to make predictions. What we're talking about right now is a lot of ways to engage children in reading with you, but don't do it ad nauseum, because then you
Yes.
lose the magic of the book. So then you're like, you just read the book. You're asking me 1,000 questions. But you can do things like, you know, examine the paratextual features. Sometimes these paratextual features, everything besides the text, give you a lot of information. What do you think this is going to be about? And things
Right.
like that. And then you're turning and you're asking. What we do here is to assess comprehension. We'll ask some basic questions like, well, what's the dog doing? Just to make sure they're paying attention and that they're comprehending what's happening. But then you want to ask, which is our favorite here at the museum, those open-ended
Open-ended.
questions. What might happen next? How would you react in this situation? And that is that dialogic reading with the child, and that really is going to help aid comprehension.
Yes.
However, like I said, don't put that in your brain and then ruin the magic of reading because you want to ask a million questions or you want to because then they'll just be like, can you read the story?
Right.
Which also reminds me, reading the story again and again and again.
Yes.
Yeah, go
yes.
ahead.
I was just going to say, you probably will read Brown Bear about 500,000 times over the course of your child's toddlerhood. But guess what? That means that they're picking up on it. They could probably read it to you verbatim without even seeing it. My mother once said that when I was young, Clip Clop the Horse was my favorite book, and I knew if she skipped a page. So, but that's also going to bring you into a situation where now that child is reading or perceives themselves as a reader because they now feel like they know the words to that. And I think that also paired with environmental print, which is an important extra literary feature of learning how to read as well, is knowing that, like, you know, that red octagon is a stop sign. And some of those things, if they notice those features in a book, then that just gives them even more confidence that they are readers. And I think often what turns older children off from reading is that they move from reading for pleasure to reading solely for information or for assignments. And so one of the things we really try hard to maintain here is that reading is a pleasurable activity. It can also lead to additional knowledge, but more than anything else, it's a pleasurable experience.
And I mean, I have really fond memories of Roald Dahl books as a child, James and the Giant Peach.
Yes.
I was in like 3rd and 4th grade, and I still wanted my stepmom to read that book to us. You know, like I was just like, we were so excited. I've taught 10th graders who got so excited when I brought a picture book out. Like they just wanted to, we were talking about metaphor, but they really just like to be read to. And so just having that experience, no matter how old they are, you know, it's okay to bring out a chapter book and say, okay, y'all want to read tonight? And of course, you're going to, as they get the tweens and teens, you're going to get some resistance, but do it as long as you can.
And I tell you, audiobooks are also a great tool to use. And again, as we said, receptive language is always going to be more advanced. And so children will be ready to hear more advanced, complex stories and advanced vocabulary. And so if they get into that routine, we always read at bedtime at my house. And so if you get into that routine where you just know that every night, you know, I had a younger brother and each of us got to pick a book and then my mom picked a book. And so I think having those routines that children can count on, and as you said, continuing to read to children even after they're able to read to themselves is such a big thing.
Well, you're prioritizing it in your household too,
yes,
right? And you want them to see you reading, even if it's magazines or newspapers, like have those out so they can see, oh, there's conveyed messages there that I'm taking in. It's not just reading on my phone. There's nothing wrong with reading on your phone, but have those out too to some variety.
And sometimes having that print to hold on to is important too.
And as you go to your child's classrooms, as they get old, the early years, you'll see some of these big books. And these big books are mostly because you have multiple children to read to. And what you're doing is you're showing them, you're giving them print awareness. So again, the title, but as you're reading to them, you are, see if my skills are still here to open
and if you can read upside down, you've gotten it really good.
Ooh, what do we see here?
Yes.
We see, and then you ask these questions. But I'm going to point like this because then I'm conveying to the child that these squiggles on this line that they don't know what the message is. There's a message there, and I'm reading. So that's building print awareness, but it's also building print motivation. Like really, like, oh, I want to be able to do that. And what you just said is it's empowering when they were like, I can do that. I
know
can
how to
turn
read
the
that.
pages,
Yeah.
and I know some of these words.
Right.
And then they do feel like readers.
And you're teaching book care at the same time. When I was younger, we didn't have as many board books available to us. And now that's just a natural thing that children have. And so, you teach them to sort of make that transition from books that they can treat a little bit rougher than others. And then you say, oh, well, remember this book, it has pages and they can tear very gently. So we have to be very careful while we're turning.
And we talked about the rich vocabulary that can be available, but there's also the phonological awareness and the phonological skills. So that's the basis of phonics. And so later on, a child will be able to have the alphabetic principle. This letter B makes the B sound. This letter S makes the S sound. But before even that happens, they are hearing the sounds.
Yes.
And there are some really good books that help with phonological awareness.
That go with that, yes. And
we have some.
One of the most important things that you can do to help your child become a reader is to rhyme. And we don't as much focus on the nursery rhymes any longer, but that's such an important skill that children have to have because we call them word families as you're getting into, kindergarten and first grade. If children cannot hear the sounds that are similar, then they don't understand the concept of word families, and that's a fundamental element of children being able to read. So, for example, you have to know that AT says at, and then you can make that, at, and go from there. So that's an important thing. Same thing with books like we read in our childhood, Dr. Seuss and some others like that, that had that controlled vocabulary. There are ways to do that are not like the school readers that we used to have when we were younger that actually have a little bit of a story to them. But those are the important things to be able to I will not eat them, on a train, I will not eat them. In the rain, I will not eat them here or there. I will not eat them anywhere.
job.
Those kinds of things. Yes, yes. So any of those kinds of things where you're doing that repetition and you're utilizing, the same set of words repeatedly, it's going to help reinforce that.
And there's research on if you can memorize certain families like at, in, us.
Yes.
All they have to do is change that beginning consonant sound, which is called the onset.
Yes.
To the rhyme, and then they can create 654 different words just from knowing the word families.
Yes.
So that's those CVC words are what they're going to be learning in first grade.
Absolutely.
But before they get there, they have to be able to hear rhymes and the sounds, and there's some great ways to do that. So let's talk about Brown Bear, Brown Bear. What can we do with Brown Bear, Brown Bear?
So Brown Bear, Brown Bear is really a wonderful book to do lots of different things. As we said, it's one that's very easy to catch. It also has a rhythmic cadence to it, and it has beautiful illustrations, so you can talk about that as well. But it's very easy for children to follow along. And, Brown Bear, what do you see? I see, what do you think it's going to be? I see a red bird looking at me. So you're building up that rhythm as you go. And what I really like about these books, Eric Carle and Bill Martin Jr., at the very end, there's also a summary of it. And so at the end, you go back and review all of the books that you've already, or all of the animals that you've seen previously.
I actually did this one at story time recently.
Yes.
And all the kids in here, there were about 8 kids, they all knew this book so well.
It's amazing.
Yeah, we know, but they still were interested. And I did hide the last page to see what they could remember, and they were so excited, and they were like, wait, what was it? And they were asking each other. So it's just another fun way to engage in the book and jog your memory.
Absolutely. And there are also ways to, once a child becomes familiar with it, then you can kind of do the tricky trickster kinds of things like, oh, red bird, what do you see? I see a green duck looking at me. And then,
that's not a green duck.
Right. And so that's giving you the chance to kind of assess along the way as well.
See who's paying attention.
Yes, if they're paying attention or... and also, again, that's giving them that autonomy to be able to say, hey, sometimes I know things that grown-ups don't know. And that's really empowering for kids to be able to do that.
You're also working on your colors,
Yes.
adjectives, nouns, animals. Yeah, it's just a great book.
And also, I have not ever seen a purple cat in my regular everyday life, but I think this also gives children permission to have that fantasy element to it as well. And I will always be a proponent of letting children color however they would like to. But, if Eric Carle says you can have a purple cat, then purple cats exist.
We also have books like Goodnight Moon, which everyone knows, which is the theme of our gala this past year.
Right.
And so these patterns do really help to build that understanding of how language works, and they can expect what's going to happen
What's
next.
going to come next.
This one's one of my favorites. This was actually my baby brother's when he was little. It actually has his name here. It says 1992. But this one I read every Halloween because, the little old lady was not afraid of everything, and it's a cumulative story.
Right.
And so it's a lot of onomatopoeia too, so it's interactive and they can engage with you. So she stops and she sees 2 shoes that go clomp, clomp, a shirt that goes wiggle, wiggle, and then I will pause and see if they remember if it's clomp, clomp or wiggle, wiggle, and if they're paying attention. And they get to do a movement with it. So we have some kinesthetics there as they're reading the story together. And Halloween is my absolute favorite holiday.
Yes,
It's one of my favorites. But there are a lot like this, like the little lady was not who swallowed a fly.
Yes, any of those things that are cumulative. Yes,
The house
that Jack built. Yes.
And then you were telling me this is one of my favorites when I taught elementary school.
Yes, and you're building up mathematical language, but it's a way to do some of that mathematical thinking in a way that's different from just a paper and pencil task. And so the idea behind this is that mom has made these cookies, and at first it's just a boy and a girl at the house, and then all of a sudden more friends are coming and they have to figure out how to share so that everyone gets to have cookies. Plus,
Great Fair Shares book.
when we read this in my classroom, we always had cookies as well, so that makes it a little bit of a special treat as well.
And this reminds me of the way that we choose books here at the museum.
Yes.
I almost said library. We are at the museum. So we are very much practice windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, which is by Dr. Rudine Bishop Sims. She coined that term. And what we're saying is we want children to see themselves reflected in our books. We want them to learn about other cultures as well. And we want them to build empathy. We want them to slide in that glass door and really feel the perspective and learn about another culture or another situation. And so we take book selection very seriously.
Absolutely.
You, me, the education team, our store manager, Danielle, we really want to make sure that our books are practicing that philosophy of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that we try very hard to do as well is support our teachers as well. And so we talk a lot to children about those kinds of things that they're reading in school, but we also acknowledge that we have a lot more freedom to choose the types of books that we're sharing with children. And so families at home, the same thing. So, there is an expectation when children are going to school that sometimes there is an educational benefit that is coming along with these. And so there's specific reasons why choosing certain books is done.
Yeah.
Whereas at home, you have a little bit more freedom to be able to choose. All books are beneficial. Even I used to tell some of my kids, when I was a new teacher, there were some times where I was like, well, this isn't a great book. And I realized you don't really want to say that. And I used to do what I called Speedy Scooby theater, where if children brought in like cartoon-based books or something, I would still read it to them, but I would read it very quickly. So I would say, all right, get ready, we're going to listen fast. And so things like that where, you're giving them the opportunity to exercise that autonomy and choose those books is important.
Which reminds me of that same group that I had here for story time recently. There were some older children because they were out of school.
Yes.
And they were talking about Dog Man, which, as we know, was a book first, and now it's a very popular movie. And it's the whole, my students love the Captain Underpants series. That's fine. They're reading. Graphic novels are really enticing to tweens and, it's almost tweens. So bring those in. We have a bunch of different, like we were just saying, we have chapter books here. We have some fun chapter books here, some silly chapter books. If it's not your favorite mom, dad, grandma, teacher, it's okay. Just keep them interested in these books. We also have
some local.
Where'd she go? We have our local author here, which she disappeared. Oh, here she is.
Yes.
Jaden Toussaint. I don't know if you know Marty Dumas, but she's from New Orleans, and she's on our Black History Wall of Fame right now as a NOLA mark maker. These books are fantastic, and you can see how engaging they can be to a reluctant reader as well, because there's a lot of text here, but it's a lot of visuals, and it's very engaging. It's a lot of fun. But then I wanted to talk about this book.
Yes, this is one of my favorites. So playing with language is such an important thing when you're young, but as you get older, as you get to be an older reader, you start to talk about things like idioms and things like that. And so these books, which were written by actually Herman Munster, Fred Gwynne, there's a series of them, The King Who Reigned, there's one, The 16-Hand Horse, and it's basically taking some of these things that we say every day, like there's a fork in the road, and showing a literal interpretation of that. And so it gives you the chance to talk about some of those figures of speech, some of those things that are just common within our language, but do you really understand what that means? Or Daddy has a mole on his nose.
Very Amelia Bedelia.
Yes, very much
and
so.
And Junie B. Jones. I used to read to my first graders Junie B. Jones, and they got all of her mistakes.
Love it.
They were just like, that's not what it really means.
That's not what you do? Yeah.
It was really fun.
But like gamble, that's a word that they probably wouldn't know. So then you talk about, gamble is another word for like frolicking on the lawn.
And frolicking is a great word too. I like that word you used. It's a great thing to say to children.
Right.
But the research shows that if the family's reading to children and the
Yes.
teachers are reading to children, by third grade their vocabulary is like, whew.
Absolutely.
It's so much better than children who aren't read to,
Yes.
obviously.
Yes.
But it's not just building a love of reading, building the phonological awareness. It's really building, like the vocabulary is there. And then,
Right.
like we said, talking about the books enhances that comprehension too. Talking about the words. What do you think frolicking means? What do you think galloped means? What do you think gambled means?
Well, and the great news is that books are accessible in so many different places. So we have them here in Talk and Play. You can find them at your local library. Oftentimes you can find them at the grocery store or at the Dollar Tree. And so there are lots of different places where you can find them. The thrift store will often have them at fairly reasonable prices. And so you may not have a very large library within your own home, but there are lots of things that you can have access to throughout our city. And so, we definitely want to encourage that. And if you feel like you're not a very confident reader yourself, then, like I said, find someone who you think is and watch them. Use that as a model. And so just practice. Kids often are less concerned with the performance element of it and just your presence. And
and building that positive connection to reading.
It's all about the relationship with the younger children. And if you build that when you're young, then you'll sustain it as they get older.
And we're not going to talk about the phonics wars, but
Correct.
we are going to talk about how important phonics is.
Yes.
But wherever your child's school is and whatever your philosophy is, we both have studied this a lot and have a lot of experience here. And it's really what we're talking about is building that positive connection to reading. The phonics, the phonological skills are there. If you're building it with these fun books that we just talked about, you can talk about, that's like cat, that's just like bat. You can talk about phonics while you're reading with your child as that's developmentally appropriate. Kindergarten, we don't have to push it when they're 3 years old.
Sure.
But like I said, the 3-year-olds are getting that phonological awareness from the songs, the finger play, the books that we just talked about. And then later, you can figure out what your phonics instruction is with your child's teacher, and then come talk to us, and we'll tell you all about our philosophies on phonics. We definitely believe that phonics should be taught, but we also believe that a balanced literacy approach is where children are going to love to learn reading. We actually have a program here called NOLA Readers. It's for second graders, NOLA Readers 2.0. It's for second graders in New Orleans Public Schools. They get to come here into the New Orleans Public Library. They get a free book. One of the teachers...
They can get a library card as well.
Oh, they get a library card.
Yes.
And we take the book selection very seriously, and there are all of these activities that the kids can do and the parents and the children can do in connection with the book.
Right.
But we had a teacher who we quoted in our we had to do grant work, and we're like, what was that quote? She was just thrilled that we were actually doing a program just for the love of reading and just to be in the presence of a good book, and not like, you have to take this test at the end of this book, and you have to be able to read all of these words. And she said that was lost. And that's what happens with these pendulums swinging back and forth with phonics. I used to be fascinated by my former teachers who I got to work with when they would say things like, I've seen so much over the past 20 years. And now here I am, I'm like, I've seen so much in the past 20 years, especially with teaching reading. But there's nothing that's going to tell you surrounding your children by lots and lots of books and having language, a positive connection and language is going to deter any reading efforts later on.
Yeah.
So,
and give them opportunities to read what they want, even if it's not, as you were saying, kind of your cup of tea.
Yeah.
But, and I think what you will find is that children are willing to read more complex or more often when it's something that is their topic of interest or whatever. And
yeah, that's also important what you just said, because we have some, as a former elementary school teacher, parents were like, well, they're not ready for that book yet. But if you're reading with them, they can be ready for that book. And we had a great librarian in our school and at Woodridge, but Sue Hall, shout out to Sue, she would always say, this isn't your level, but if this is your interest, let's get a more knowledgeable reader to read with you.
Right.
Whether it was a 5th grader reading to a 2nd grader, whether it was a teacher, that's important to not squelch that. If they're interested in something that's a little high level, don't say no.
Well, and also I tell you, as I said, my mother was an English teacher, and one of the things that she did a long time ago before audiobooks really existed was that for children that she knew would struggle a little bit, she would read the books and give them the cassette tapes. And when you can hear the book while you're reading along, it changes your understanding. And for some of those things that you might trip over as you're reading, like I can't tell you how many people have told me that they didn't realize that the girl in Harry Potter was named Hermione instead of Hermione.
Oh.
You know, and so sometimes you
Yeah.
hear those things and you're like, oh, that's what that is. Or for me, it was Imogene. I had never really seen that written out, and it was in several books, and I was like, oh, that makes so much more
Yeah.
sense. But if you're not having to stumble over those things that give you difficulty, then it enables you to have a smoother reading experience. It enables you to be able to focus on the story and not just, we've talked about balanced literacy as well.
Yeah.
Where if you're solely focused on the phonics, you miss the story and the flow of it. And if you're only focused on the story element of it, then you miss some of the important, like fundamental reading things that go along with it. So,
And when your child gets into school, they're going to assess their phonics ability, their phonemic awareness, if they can hear
Yes.
those sounds and words. They're going to assess fluency as well. And my students would, when they heard fluency, they would read as fast as they possibly
Yes.
could. But it's fluency with prosody. So it's fluency with expression and how you read. Because if you don't have the prosody, you lack the comprehension later because you were just
right.
and you're like, I don't know what I just read. Like, you have the skills, you definitely had the phonics, but you couldn't understand it because of the way that you were reading it. And so we practice that with the way that we read to them.
Absolutely.
We inflect at a question mark, and we get excited at an exclamation point. And if you're a shy, kind of reserved parent, you still got to do the voices. You still got to do the inflections.
Well, and the way that you read prose is going to be different from the way that you read poetry or, singing books or whatever. I will say also, since we're on the topic of phonics and phonemic awareness, one of the things that parents can do to help their children, in addition to reading some of these, foundational books, is when your child is learning the ABCs, and we're all, prone to say, oh, B says ba. B does not say ba. B says b. And so when you're talking to children about the sounds that letters make, if your speech therapist, your child's teacher will all thank you if you really think about the fact that those are important elements to focus on. Because later when the child goes to read and they say, oh, this says ka-ata. No, it doesn't. It says cat. It's like the old electric company, where they would say sandwich.
Yeah. Oh, compound words. We didn't even talk about compound words. That's another whole thing. We had a compound word in the story time that I keep referring to. And I was just like, that's a compound word.
Yes.
And the older girl was like, oh, I know what compound words are. And then we just got to talk about it. In my classroom, we had a homonym wall. They were like, oh, that means the same, but it's a different, getting really jazzed up about language. And if they tell you that's a homonym or a synonym or an antonym, they love antonyms. They love opposite day. If you start telling them about compound words, they really are starting to look for those, and they're starting to practice them. And it's a lot of fun just to get them jazzed about language and words.
And you're preparing them for the future as well, because if you know the difference between pear the fruit and pair the combination of two things together, then when you go to write a business letter, you're going to use the correct one.
Or ChatGPT will write it for you.
Right, exactly. But those things that aren't incorrectly spelled aren't often caught, and so you have to use your noggin.
I really do believe that the connection is definitely there. And when kids hear them, they get jazzed. You can write them. A classroom teacher can stop and jot them down.
Sure.
I would have them go at it to the wall. But if you're in the car, say, oh, do you know there's 3 ways to say two. There's 3 ways to say there. And they start to get really excited when they hear those.
Yes, big words. Little kids like big words too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And always, like what we say here, because we do very much relish open-ended questions. When someone asks questions, we like to say, what a great question.
Right.
You want to promote that inquiry, but then also, oh, I like that word you used, because you also want to promote that they're thinking about words, and vocabulary is important.
Yes.
And I also... I love it when you can hear some of the words that parents say that come out of children's mouths, or actually, and things like that. That they're not like the different tiers of language. They're the basic language, the conversational language, and not academic language. But there's an adult in that house that says that word all the time, which I just think is delightful. Evidently is something that my grandmother say. And I was like, this is apparently. Yeah, that's another one too. So there are lots of books here in Talk and Play.
Yes.
Talk and Play is from a quote by Lucy Calkins. It says, "Literacy is nothing more than talk and play." So get talking, get playing, get a lot of books for your children, and come here to Talk and Play and read these books. Like Holly said, it's before the paywall. Story time is regular, Wednesday through Sunday now.
Right.
And on March 9th, the Imagination Library is all about the crew of Dolly working with is it Dolly Foundation?
Yes, it's the Imagination Library from
It's
Dolly
from
Parton's
Dolly
Imagination
Parton.
Library. Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're providing books for every child who signs up. So
In Orleans Parish.
In Orleans Parish. Thank you for that caveat.
Yeah.
Every child
We're working on expanding.
with the Orleans Parish zip code can sign up to have a free book sent to their house, I think once a month.
I think it's monthly from
Yeah.
0 to 5.
So build that library up. That's a great way to build it up. If you're a New Orleans Public Schools second grader, come to NOLA Readers 2.0.
Yeah, talk to your teachers about. It's a free program.
And always, always the New Orleans Public Library. My grandfather took me to the main branch when I was a child and said, everything you need to know is in this
Is
building.
here. I
And
was a
like,
ladder branch girl.
What? How is that possible? And I thought that was the coolest thing. And I'm so glad
Yes,
that I had
that we're able-
adults who really, really loved reading and really read with me and promoted it. And here I am, the big nerd that I am now.
There you
because
go.
I still love to read.
There you go. And we also want to be a resource for you as well. So both of our contact information is available on our website. And so if you want to reach out to us and say, hey, my kid is really interested in X subject, we'd be glad to recommend some great books for you.
And Miss Sherlyn, too, who's here.
Sherlyn is a great resource.
Wednesdays.
Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday.
So come to Storytime on those days and talk to Miss Sherlyn. She's a retired speech pathologist, and she's been in the school systems for years, and so she's a great resource as well. Anything else you want to say about reading?
I think that's it. Just that it's, you can never start too early, and if you haven't started yet and your child is older, start now.
Yeah. Do we have any questions? Okay. Well,
All right.
let's go read.
Thank you. This was great. Yes.
Bye. Thank
Happy
you.
reading.